Over the last few years, one country has been growing more and more and more in the public eye, gaining a new hold on global media, unlike anything that we've seen before. South Korea. But how did a country so small gain such an immense presence around the world? Why would people who don't even understand the language dedicate hours and hours of their life listening to K-pop and following the day-to-day dealings of K-pop idols? Why have K-dramas become such a powerful force in modern-day streaming? It's all part of something called the Korean Wave. Let's take a look. The Korean Wave is a term used to refer to the increase in global popularity surrounding South Korean culture. Although it's been gaining incredible momentum in the last 5 years or so, this increase in South Korea's global presence has actually been building up since the 1980s, when Korean dramas, or K-dramas, began to be introduced to the world. South Korea had been broadcasting radio dramas since 1927, when they were still under Japanese rule. Interestingly enough, although it was broadcast from South Korea, 70% of the content was still in Japanese. After the Korean War, however, South Korea started experimenting with a new TV broadcasting station called HLKZ-TV, which lasted only a few years due to a fire. All of this built up to 1961 when the first national television channel was funded by Korea, the Korean Broadcasting System, or KBS. On this network, we can find the very first Korean television film. It was a 15-minute show titled The Gate of Heaven. As the 1960s roared by, the competition for broadcasting time in Korea became fierce and aggressive. We began to see many different types of series come to the air, anything from controversial dramas to historical TV series and more. But due to the limited number of television sets around the country, growth was limited. This all changed in the 1980s though, when the color TV was invented. The introduction of color into TV production sparked a new interest in many Korean filmmakers, and the qualities of the show around this time increased proportionally to this new interest. In 1987, a K-drama called Love and Ambition became so successful that it went overseas to MBC, something that can be looked back on now as a huge milestone for Korean television. The show was a massive success, with one news source writing, "Streets became quiet around the airing time of the drama as practically everyone in the country was at home in front of their TV." And hyperbole or not, this success is impressive, and it soon proved to not be unique. We began to see more and more K-dramas coming to American television screens, with one of the most notable being the series Eyes of Dawn, which aired on NBC in 1991. This series covered the difficult times of the Korean War. When the NBC K-drama specials picked up traction, a new player joined the scene, a new channel called SBS, which also went on to produce several successful K-drama series. This era of K-dramas being sent over to the United States marked the start of the Korean Wave. It wasn't all smooth sailing though. On the back of the Korean War, restrictions began to be put into place that would limit the number of foreign films allowed to be shown in cinemas in Korea. These were made with the intent of preventing competition between domestic films and foreign blockbusters. But in 1986, the Motion Pictures Exporters Association of America filed a complaint to the United States Senate, compelling them to do something in an attempt to lift those restrictions. As a result, in 1988, 20th Century Fox became the first American film studio to set up a distribution office in South Korea. By 1994, however, Hollywood's share of the South Korean movie market had reached a peak of nearly 80%, leading for South Korea's share on their own film industry to fall below 16%. This left South Korea with a problem. There was an obvious potential for explosive growth in their media, but if the industry was being dominated by foreign films, how could they stand out? They decided that they had to find a way to grow their budding media empires, and as a result, South Korea became one of the only countries, if not the only country in the world, to have a dedicated goal of becoming the world's leading exporter of popular culture. The government began subsidizing and providing support to its creative industries, and even began providing funding to startups. Part of the reason for this incredible push was because Korea wanted to increase its presence and power throughout the world. It might not have the biggest military or the most outstanding economy, but if they were able to refine their image, then they'd have some sort of intellectual dominance across the globe. For example, while the United States brought fame to iPhones, Coca-Cola, or the Avengers, Korea began seeking to develop a similar reputation for themselves through its own media exports. In the late 1990s, 1990s, Korea had a solid foundation laid for the growth of their media across the globe. And in 1999, their first big-budget local film became a massive global success, a film called Shiri. It grossed over $26 million US, which surpassed even the most generous expectations. This success wasn't just blossoming in the West either. Even in China, a newspaper called Beijing Youth Daily published an article talking about the zeal of Chinese audiences for Korean TV and pop songs. As the turn of the millennium came around, Korean pop music started to make just as big of an impact as its film counterpart. In February of 2000, a boys band called HOT became the first modern K-pop artist to give an overseas performance. They even sold out concerts in Beijing. Korean media gained so much influence that the Chinese government decided to restrict and limit the number of K-dramas being shown to Chinese audiences so that they could keep their own industries alive. In 2002, following the reversal of a long-standing trade restriction between the two countries, a K-pop album called Listen to My Heart became the very first album by a Korean musician ever to sell 1 million copies in Japan. And on the back of this success, other K-pop artists began to work their way into the Japanese music industry as well. This foundation that Korea had been laying was absolutely vital to their growth. In the 2000s and 2010s, social media and video sharing sites became a global phenomena that only bolstered Korea's success. This augmentation of the already growing Korean entertainment industry produced some of the most iconic things to come out of the country to date. In 2012, the Korean song Gangnam Style by Psy went viral, becoming the very first YouTube video ever to hit over 1 billion views. This Korean wave of entertainment gradually transitioned into a foot in the door for Korea to export other parts of their culture. Korean cuisine and cosmetics have always been integral to Korea for a long time, but those industries were able to ride this wave to the point that they became recognizable all over the planet. All of these different aspects of exported Korean culture began feeding each other's growth. And in turn, that increased tourism in South Korea, with South Korea welcoming over 12 million visitors in 2013, with 6 million of those being from China alone. This massive growth evolved into a Korean wave entirely different than what it originally started as, and gained the name Hallyu 2.0, or the New Korean Wave. This is where things really picked up. This new wave saw South Korea taking full advantage of 21st century digital technology and social media. But not only did we see a greater role in the popularity of Korean pop music, but other exports like video games and animation also began coming out of Korea. While Korean television had geographical limitations, social networking sites and video sharing sites like YouTube provided an easy way for the entire world of fans to interact with South Korean popular culture. The success of this Korean wave was so monumental that it led other governments in Asia to pass measures to protect their own cultural industries. Japan, China, and Taiwan all made specific measures to stem the flow of Korean films and drama into their countries, which admittedly did cause a small drop-off in sales for those films and dramas, and this meant that Korea had to put extra effort into other aspects of their culture, and eventually they found their mark with K-pop and Korean idols. This paved the way for groups such as BTS and the new genre of YouTube like mukbang, which recreates the experience of eating with a friend, to take the internet by storm. In addition, the popular streaming platform Netflix also started to take an interest in South Korean media, and they even brought a studio space there in light of the growing global demand. The view counts on Netflix's Korean dramas go up every year, with higher and higher view counts coming from countries like Canada, France, Germany, India, Japan, Malaysia, the Philippines, Qatar, Singapore, Taiwan, Thailand, and the United States. Needless to say, Korea has been absolutely killing it in the entertainment industry, only growing their Korean wave stronger and stronger, and they seem to be well on their way to the goal of becoming the most dominant media industry on the planet. K-pop groups like BTS have been breaking record after record for years, with world tours and making appearances at the US Billboard Music Awards and other foreign events. Korean movies and dramas also continue to see a spread across the planet with unprecedented momentum, with films like the dark comedy thriller movie Parasite going on to win awards at international film festivals, making history by winning 2 Academy Awards in 2020 for Best Picture and Best International Film. It's hard to say exactly where Korea is going to go with their entertainment industry, but one thing is for sure. They're going to be pouring their entire hearts and souls into the craft until they're one of the most dominant media forces on the planet.